park was basically my backyard as a kid, and my parents took us hiking in the park all the time. And the thing that comes to mind is a picture of myself in the park as a maybe 7 or 8 year old, and we're hiking up White Oak Canyon. And my favorite thing to do was to scramble over the rocks on that hike. And there's a picture of me jumping from one rock to the other. You know, my hair is flying, and I was a tomboy as a kid. And so that's the memory that comes up for me is, you know, being in there all the time. As a teenager, I remember, oh no, we have to go in the park again. I didn't want to do it. But then also, as an adult and coming back home from being at college or graduate school, just the comfort that I would feel and being back in the area. And you know, in moments of crisis during my life, my parents would take me on a hike. Well, you're sad or you're going through something, let's go on a hike. And so it's just a place of good memories, but also comfort and home, feeling of home. Why isn't that story told very often? And then around that time, I was also studying, getting a graduate degree in rhetoric and trying to explain to my dad what that was. And he said, you know, if you really want to understand an important story, you should look at how it was that families could have been represented in such a way that then they were displaceable from Shenandoah National Park. And then also around that time, there was a newspaper article in the Washington Post about families who were descendants of people who had been displaced wanting to have access to the park's archives. And the controversy was families felt like they weren't allowed to look at the materials in the archives. By then I was an assistant professor at Louisiana State University, and so I called them and said, can I come see what you have in your archives? And they said yes, because they had just opened it to the public. And really it was less about keeping materials from people and more about cataloging all those materials and making sure that it was clear what materials they had. And so that then people could come look at them and they would have them organized and cataloged. So I went up there and looked at what they had. You know, they have lots of maps there, they have lots of information about the flora and fauna in the park. And while I was there, the archivist said, well, what would you like to see? And I said, well, I'm just curious what you have. And just as I was about to leave, he brought me a box full of letters. And it was a really profound moment because I teach autobiography, I teach writing, and to read what was in those letters was just really powerful. I grew up in this area, so I could hear the voices in the letters as I read them. And I could see that there was documentary evidence that the people who had lived in the park were different from the broader stories told about them. There was much more to them and their lives contained in those letters than what the stories we had heard about.
Take a train ride just to see you. Ride for hours just to please you. You don't know how much I need you, 'cause you're my home away from home, away from home, away from being alone.
And I got really interested in the juxtaposition between these handwritten in pencil letters to the typed on official government letterhead letters. So they would get letters back to them on Department of Interior letterhead, typed. but they would write letters back in handwritten in pencil. And that was just a really, stark example of the power relationship between families who lived in the mountains and the government officials who were in charge of their lives at that moment. And there was a lot of ways that the rules and regulations of the park and the transfer of lands from the park meant that the answer to their questions was often no, we can't do that for you. But they wrote, and you can tell by the context of the letters that family members knew that the answer would probably be no, but they wrote anyway. And to me, that was a really powerful indication of them speaking back to people who were in positions of power and compelling the government to address their concerns as they were transitioning and moving out of the park. So you've got folks who are decision makers in Washington, D.C. who aren't really aware of the diversity of families in the area. And then you have the families being told a story about, well, if this becomes a park, you can stay here. And so then by the time that things get rolling and are in motion, and the SCCD convinces the Virginia Assembly to condemn the land blanketly, not tract by tract, but as an entire huge, more than 100,000 acres piece, it was too late to be unified.
I hope to make you my own before the train ride home. I hope to